So it sounds like we have many areas of agreement on the threat of austerity to actually reviving the economy and the threats of outmigration. Simon, I'm going to leave it to you to sort of do cleanup here and try to set us off for like where to from here.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for this opportunity to talk about these incredibly important and actually disturbing events. And you know, we've had 3 hours, 3 very insightful and articulate presentations by senators, 3 brilliant analyses from my fellow panelists. And I think the question, quite reasonable question that you should all be asking right now is, so what? What do we do? What are the pressure points? Where do you need to bring what kind of political attention in order to really make a difference? And I've got 3 for your consideration, drawing on what I've heard today. Actually, the first one I didn't hear today, and I want to make sure you all have this very clear, because this is the relatively easy, straightforward ask. Congress has already agreed, and this is appropriated money in the form, and generally authorized money in the form of the Community Disaster Loans, CDLs, which the US Treasury is refusing to administer in the standard, normal, the way it would be administered for US states, for example. Now, what's the explanation for this discriminatory and frankly unprofessional behavior? They're not paying attention. This is not a top important item for the Trump administration. It is negligence. Now, that's a terrible thing, but the opportunity is that you can have congressional representatives of all kinds put pressure on Treasury. You can put pressure on Treasury yourself, but I advise you to bring the Congress people with you and get them to up their game, disperse this money. The brownouts that we're seeing in Puerto Rico, for example, Richard mentioned today, are a direct result of underfunding PREPA, which itself is coming from the lack of cash and the way in which money, which is available under law, is not flowing to Puerto Rico and to electricity generation and transmission. So that's really important. That's straightforward, and we all have to be on that. The second pressure point I would suggest is something that's already been flagged by Martin. And in fact, Martin and Maria and I and a number of other people wrote a letter about the fiscal plan, a public letter which is available to everyone, and hopefully we can distribute that, which says it's very clearly, and this is a fundamental point, and Martin made this point, that when Congress appropriates further funds, as they have done, they did back in October, not enough, absolutely, I think you've heard that today, but a small step in a reasonable direction. That money is not intended and must not go to the creditors. And unfortunately, what is happening through the technical details of the way in which fiscal plans are being presented, this is building again on what Martin said, is that the governor is currently presenting a fiscal plan that would take some of that federal money, give it to the creditors. That money is for vulnerable people in Puerto Rico. And your estimates may vary. I would say at least 1 million American citizens are in that vulnerable category and desperately need that assistance, which Congress is providing, but because it has to filter through this particular mechanism, it may not reach them. So that's slightly more complicated than the US Treasury point at the beginning, but it's incredibly important. And if you, the people in this room, don't take this on, I really don't know who will. Okay, but I have every confidence. The third point, and I think this, I think this panel has been framed very well, and the day is framed very well as a vision for recovery. And I think we should be talking about vision, and this is the point Richard was making. There are tremendous opportunities for jobs and for people in Puerto Rico. What is going to work? What is going to lead that growth? I don't know. I've worked on lots of disasters and lots of recoveries around the world. I was previously chief economist at the International Monetary Fund, among other things. I'll tell you, though, the key is always people. And the key to people is always education. Human capital, if you want to use economics jargon. But what is human capital? Human capital is you go to a decent school, you get appropriate skills, you figure out how to use them in the workplace, you get more training as technology changes, right? So that's your core business. People are going to be central. But here's the critical piece for Puerto Rico that has become, I think, for all of us, into very clear relief, including today, which is people in a modern, technologically sophisticated economy, at high productivity, getting paid high wages, which is what we all want and what Puerto Rico can have, People need electricity. They need reliable, reasonably cheap electricity. And that's what Puerto Rico has been missing. And there was a model, which has been nicely explained to you, that kind of worked for a while, although at lower levels of productivity, with a particular electricity model that is very intensive, for example, in fuel oil, which is extremely expensive and has a cost per kilowatt hour of the 20, 25 cents range. You're not going to be competitive. You're not going to keep young people on this island unless you bring down the cost of electricity. Now, the good news is there is a discussion about this. There are some interesting technical options on the table. Renewables, in the data that I've looked at, and the careful analysis has been done, are definitely going to play a role in this. Should there be federal investment in energy generation and transmission in Puerto Rico? Yes, absolutely. How much? Well, how much can you get? Right? It's a very sensible investment. It'll have big positive effects. I'm happy to work with you on that, but there will be some limit to how much you can get for that, and there will be some choices to be made. How much goes to the vulnerable people? How much available money do you put into electricity? But bringing down that cost of electricity is absolutely essential to creating a new kind of economy, to supporting opportunities for young people, and to supporting the education system, having people come back to the island. So that's the third economic pressure point. And again, happy to work with you on that. We have a lot of people at MIT, for example, who want to be engaged with that. And nobody I know wants to tell Puerto Rico what to do. We want to work with people in Puerto Rico and from Puerto Rico and help you find sensible solutions. But here's my one political suggestion, if I may. And I know I'm trespassing here. I'm just an economist. But I'm looking at the data. And I'm going through these points, and I'm listening to our wonderful speakers and colleagues today. And I think Senator Blumenthal said this very well and very clearly to you in the first talk, which is the only problem you have in Puerto Rico, or a binding constraint on all of these dimensions, is you don't have a single senator. Right? Now, you've got some senators on your side. That's fantastic. That's really helpful. They're wonderful people, and they work hard. But you don't have a senator. But here's what you do have, actually. And I don't want you to take this the wrong way, because I want people to move to Puerto Rico. I want more people to live on Puerto Rico, more people to be happy and productive in Puerto Rico. But look at Marie's numbers. And look also, if you would, at the CNN has a very nice interactive graphic, which is on their website right now, showing they got information through FEMA requests and also post office change of addresses through the Freedom of Information Act. Where exactly are Puerto Ricos going by county? Well, you know where they're going. A lot of them are going to Florida. A lot of them are going to Pennsylvania, Texas, Connecticut's also being mentioned. Register them to vote. So we have millions of American citizens who don't have a congressional or a presidential vote if they live on a particular piece of land in the Caribbean. But if the same person moves, and they're all entitled to move, and many of them are moving, if they move to the 50 states, of course they can vote. They should vote. You should be urging them to vote through all your social networks and outreach. And where do they vote? Where do they live? And therefore, where can they vote? In some of the most sensitive political areas, swing states, if you like to call them that, in the United States. Now, I say this, I offer this to you in a completely bipartisan, nonpartisan manner. Go get them. Republicans, Democrats should be competing for these voters and persuading them that they, through the Treasury, through the congressional appropriations, through the federal investment in electricity, that they, either Republicans or Democrats, are looking out for the interests of Puerto Ricans who live in 50 states and Puerto Ricans who live on the island. Look, the future, if you leave the economics on their current track, is not the rapid recovery in the governor's fiscal plan. And I fear it's not even the relatively slow recovery that we see in some other projections. And I fear it's not even a continuation of the dramatic but established decline that we see in Marie's data. The future on the baseline, if you do nothing and we do nothing, and if nothing happens politically, the young people will leave, the education system will collapse, you have a downward spiral of the kind you haven't seen, at least since the Dust Bowl in the US in the 1930s, potentially even more dramatic in terms of the net overall effects. This is all avoidable. We can absolutely recover. You can have private sector, you can have public sector do much better in Puerto Rico. But that outcome is to be determined by you and by me and by our congressional and presidential representatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon. Cleo?